The sun hung low over Ouagadougou, casting a golden haze across the crumbling rooftops and bustling market streets. Beneath the tattered layers of a dirt-stained shawl and worn sandals, Fatima Diallo shuffled past the street vendors like a ghost. Her movements were slow, deliberate, just enough to pass as one of the hundreds of beggars lining the avenues, yet sharp-eyed and methodical beneath the veil. Every corner she turned, every alley she passed, was part of her mental map, burned into memory like the scars she carried beneath her layers. A decade ago, she had worn a different uniform, the pressed whites of a military nurse. She had served with pride, following orders and stitching up soldiers wounded in battles she never fully understood. But it wasn't until her brother, Idris, an idealistic journalist, had dared to question the new power rising through the ranks, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, that she truly saw the machine from the inside. He had published an exposé on extrajudicial killings and secret detentions, calling for accountability. Within weeks, he was dead. No trial, no body. Just a whispered phone call warning her not to come home. She vanished, but she did not forget. In the 10 years that followed, Fatima changed her name, forged new alliances in the borderlands, and learned to become something else, something more dangerous. No longer the obedient medic, she trained in guerrilla camps and intelligence circles, slipping through countries under stolen identities. The woman she had once been was dead. What remained was a patient predator. And now she had returned to finish what began with her brother's last words. The capital had changed under Traoré's rule. Streets that once bustled with hope were now patrolled by rigid-faced soldiers in camouflage, their eyes wary of friend and foe alike. Propaganda posters bearing the captain's stern gaze loomed over food stalls and intersections, preaching security, unity, and sacrifice. But beneath the surface, fear simmered, fear of betrayal, of coups, of silence. It was this paranoia that gave Fatima her opening. She had arrived in Ouagadougou under the name Mariama. Her fake ID claimed she was a displaced widow from the north, another casualty of tribal conflict. No one looked too closely at the papers of the poor. Her disguise was not merely physical, it was social, psychological. She begged during the day, moving through markets and public squares where Traoré was known to walk during his heavily staged public appearances. By night, she returned to a crumbling tenement in the old sector, where she cleaned her weapon in silence and updated her route sketches with notes in invisible ink. Her target was not a sniper kill from afar. No, she needed closeness, a face-to-face moment. Something clean, something undeniable. She watched the presidential convoy for days. Black Land Cruisers surrounded by a rotating wall of elite guards. The timing was always different, the stops never announced. But patterns emerged, slight, almost imperceptible ones. On Fridays, after mosque, Traoré often visited the old war memorial near the center of town. He would walk with a tight circle of officers, shaking hands with veterans or exchanging brief words with children. A gesture of humility for the cameras, Fatima knew. But it was also a vulnerability, a moment he was exposed. She blended into the crowd one Friday morning, her body hunched and wrapped in the same brown shawl she had worn all week. A bowl in one hand, a crutch in the other. Her pistol, dismantled into 3 parts, was hidden beneath layers of fabric. The barrel in the sleeve. The trigger mechanism tucked inside the bowl. The magazine taped to her inner thigh. She had rehearsed the assembly in darkness 100 times, practiced. Raising it with one hand, one shot, one breath. The call to prayer rang out as she reached the edge of the memorial plaza. Soldiers stood at attention near the monument, their eyes scanning over her without pause. Just another shadow in the dust. She moved closer, inch by inch, guided by instinct. The roar of an engine signaled the convoy's approach. The crowd stirred, the curious and the loyal surging toward the roadside. She held back, waited. Then she saw him. Traoré stepped from the vehicle in his crisp officer's uniform, red beret tilted, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He smiled, waved. His face was older than she remembered from the news photos, more worn, but still commanding. Flanked by 2 guards, he began his slow walk through the crowd, nodding, pausing, nodding again. Her hands twitched beneath the fabric. This was it, but just as she reached into her bowl to retrieve the trigger piece, a voice, soft, trembling, whispered beside her. Fatima. She froze. A child stood at her side. Thin, no older than 9. Wide eyes filled with confusion and recognition. He stared up at her like he'd seen a ghost. "It is you," he said again. "From Taitao. My father, he knew you. You helped him when he was shot." The words struck like bullets. Her eyes darted from the boy to the guards. One of them was looking her way now. Too long, too sharp. She lowered her head, turned slightly, and muttered a prayer through cracked lips. Then she limped backward, vanishing into the flow of the crowd. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the realization that the timing wasn't right. Not yet. That night, she returned to her tenement room, silent and still. The weapon remained unassembled. She stared at it in the candlelight, then at her own reflection in a broken shard of mirror. Something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the plan. But not the mission. No, she would return. The moment had slipped, but the fire inside her burned even brighter. Somewhere in the shadows of the capital, justice was still waiting. And Fatima Diallo would not fail again. The city stirred early on the day of the independence celebration, its streets humming with anticipation and the low tension that always accompanied public gatherings under military rule. Fatima Diallo, still wrapped in the dirt-stained rags of her disguise, emerged from her tenement just as the morning sun spilled across the ochre buildings. She moved with purpose, blending seamlessly with the flow of pedestrians headed toward the Grand Plaza, where a parade and public address by Captain Ibrahim Traoré had been announced. It was a rare opportunity, one that would allow her within meters of the man she had hunted in silence for over a decade. Clusters of soldiers already flanked major intersections, their rifles resting on their chests, eyes scanning for threats. Fatima didn't flinch. She had walked through war zones with bullets flying overhead. She knew how to slow her breathing, how to fold herself into the background like a shadow at dusk. Her movements were casual, patient, like a woman with no destination and nothing to lose. The pistol, now reassembled and secured in a hidden pouch beneath her robes, weighed heavily on her side, not from mass but from meaning. As she reached the plaza's perimeter, she settled near an old peanut vendor who sat hunched beneath a striped umbrella, his blind eye and cracked voice drawing more sympathy than coins. "Peace be upon you," she whispered, offering a small coin in exchange for a place at his feet. He nodded without question, accustomed to the forgotten sharing space in the margins. From there, she had a clear view of the stage, the rising crowd, and the approaching motorcade, a gleaming convoy cutting through the city's dust like a scalpel. Cheers erupted as Traoré stepped from the lead vehicle, saluting briefly before taking his place at the microphone. His voice boomed over the square, speaking of unity, sacrifice, sovereignty, words Fatima had heard 100 times before, hollow and rehearsed. Her fingers twitched at her side, inching toward the pouch, heart steady, eyes locked on her target. She counted his guards, 5 close, 3 perimeter, 1 stationed on the nearby rooftop with a long gun. She could still make it. 1 clean shot, 1 bullet to reshape the story. But as she began to rise from her crouch, a small hand tugged at her sleeve. It was the same boy from the memorial, the one who had recognized her days before. This time, he said nothing. He only looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes, filled not with fear, but with something more dangerous, recognition. Behind him, a soldier's gaze flicked in her direction. In that split second, Fatima saw the collapse of the moment, the risk, the exposure, the unraveling. She dropped back into place, face lowered, as the boy's mother called him away. The speech ended. The convoy withdrew. The moment passed. Again. And as the crowd dispersed, Fatima remained still, haunted not by hesitation, but by fate's cruel interference. Something was wrong. Something was watching her. The mission was no longer hers alone. The arrest came not in gunfire or chaos, but in silence, just after midnight. Fatima had barely returned to her tenement when the knock came. Not a pounding assault, but a soft, methodical rhythm on the rotted wooden door. She didn't run. She knew. 2 plainclothes operatives entered without a word, their eyes cold and impersonal. She offered no resistance as they bound her wrists and covered her head with a burlap sack. The drive was long and winding, and when they finally stopped, she was escorted through corridors that smelled of dust, paper, and concrete, a hidden facility far from the usual prison cells. The sack was removed in a dim interrogation room lit only by a single, flickering bulb. Across from her sat a man she hadn't seen in 12 years, and the shock of his presence struck her harder than any blow could. Colonel Asaka Sanin, once a medic beside her in the northern campaigns, now wore the insignia of internal intelligence. His hair was grayer, his skin worn, but his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, and alive. "Fatima Diallo," he said slowly, folding his hands. "You've been a ghost for a long time." She met his gaze without fear. "Then you've finally caught one." But Asaka didn't threaten her. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "You're chasing the wrong man." For the first time in years, she blinked in confusion. He continued, "Your brother, Idris, his execution was not ordered by Traoré. It came from within the general staff, months before Traoré rose to power. He tried to stop it. That's why he was nearly purged himself." The words hung in the air, unbelievable and corrosive. Fatima felt the floor beneath her certainty crack. "Lies," she spat. But Asaka only opened a folder and slid a yellow document toward her. A classified directive marked with signatures she didn't recognize, none belonging to Traoré. She scanned it with shaking hands. Operation Scorpion, a silencing campaign against subversive journalists. Her brother's name was third on the list. Then why cover it up? She demanded. Why let him take the fall? Asaka sighed. Because that's what power does. It uses shadows to keep the light clean. Traoré needed the military's support to survive his first year. He couldn't afford enemies within or the truth outside. Fatima felt sick. For a decade, her life had been a blade sharpened toward a single throat. And now, in a quiet room with one man and one folder, it was clear, she had aimed wrong. "Why tell me this now?" she whispered. "Because," Asaka said, lowering his voice, "we need you. The real enemy is still here. The faction that killed your brother, they're still in the shadows, and they're preparing to strike again. Traoré is the face, but they control the levers. You want justice? Help us expose them." The offer wasn't redemption. It was war. But this time, Fatima knew who the real enemy was. She stood slowly, the fire in her chest reignited, not for revenge, but for truth. By the time the sun rose over Ouagadougou again, Fatima Diallo had vanished from the streets, not as a beggar, not as a hunted assassin, but as a phantom reborn with purpose. Asaka had given her names, photographs, and a coded map of an upcoming private meeting, one attended not by Traoré, but by those who truly pulled the strings. They were remnants of the old elite, military commanders, corporate intermediaries, and foreign liaisons who had been destabilizing the country from within for years, staging crises to maintain their grip on resources and power. Traoré, once thought to be the target, was merely the puppet they couldn't control. But Fatima, with her unique blend of invisibility and intelligence, could infiltrate the one place no one dared enter without allegiance. She discarded the beggar's disguise and re-emerged in tailored military fatigues taken from a locker Asaka had arranged. Her hair was tied tightly beneath a cap, and her new ID bore the name Captain Mariam Traoré, a fabricated cousin of the president, a ghost identity carved out of fake records, just believable enough. The meeting took place in the basement of an abandoned French-built embassy on the edge of the city. It was the kind of place used for deals made in whispers and handshakes sealed with blood. Fatima arrived early, walking confidently past two guards with forged clearance and a badge that caught just enough moonlight to reflect authority. Inside, the conspirators gathered around a table cluttered with files, maps, and satellite images. A projector displayed troop movements. A voice, French accented, arrogant, spoke about destabilizing Mali and redirecting arms to the northern corridor. Fatima stood silently in the shadows, recording everything with a hidden lens embedded in her lapel. Then a name was spoken, Idris Diallo. One of the men, a retired colonel, laughed about the journalist they had to bury. Rage surged, but Fatima did not move. Not yet. She waited until the final handshake, until they toasted with imported whiskey to a new Burkina. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, pulled the pistol from beneath her jacket, and placed it on the table, not raised, not fired. Just there. A symbol. "I believe," she said quietly, "justice has been waiting long enough." The room froze. But before anyone could reach for a weapon, the lights cut out. Moments later, security forces stormed the building. Asaka had timed it perfectly. Every word, every face, every confession had been transmitted in real time to a hidden operations team. By dawn, the scandal broke wide open. Arrests followed. The regime cracked not under revolt, but under truth. Traoré made a televised address acknowledging the deception and pledging reform. Fatima disappeared once more, not arrested, not praised, simply gone. But across the city, murals began to appear, of a veiled woman in shadows, hand raised not with a gun, but with a voice. Justice had not worn a uniform or carried a flag. She had worn rags. And she had changed the course of a nation.